She walked into a bakery asking for an expired cake because no one remembered her birthday. But a battle-scarred Marine heard her whisper, and in that moment, destiny shifted. A child on the edge of danger, a soldier haunted by a promise he once failed to keep, and a loyal canine ready to fight for her life. What happened next was not luck. It was a miracle unfolding in the snow. Stay with me. This story will hit your heart harder than you expect. Before we begin, let me know where in the world you're watching. Leave your city in the comments. And if you believe God sends miracles through ordinary people, subscribe and watch until the end. This story will stay with you long after the snow melts. A muted winter dusk settled over Silver Ridge as snow drifted in slow, tired spirals. Frosted Pines Bakery was normally a sanctuary of warmth, a small-town bakery with pine-green walls, fogged-up windows, and the soft hum of ovens that never seemed to rest. But that afternoon, as the snow pressed against the glass and the golden light spilled across the wooden floor, something unusual interrupted the familiar rhythm. The door opened with a faint jingle, hesitant and trembling, as if the person on the other side wasn't sure they were allowed to enter such a warm place. A small girl stepped in. Her name, though no one in the bakery knew it yet, was Lila Carter, a 7-year-old child with thin, bird-like shoulders and a frame so light it seemed the wind itself could lift her. Her hair, a dusty chestnut color, was tied into a lopsided ponytail with a red ribbon that had clearly seen better days. She wore an oversized gray coat with missing buttons, sleeves covering her hands, and on her feet were shoes so worn the toes peeked through. Her cheeks were flushed from cold and anxiety, not innocence. Her brown eyes, large, dark, and quietly haunted, searched the room with the caution of a child who had already learned the world could be unkind. She approached the counter slowly, almost apologetically. Behind it stood Sarah Whitmore, a teenage worker not older than 19. Sarah was tall and skinny, with pale skin dotted in freckles and long ginger hair tied into a messy bun. She was friendly enough, but today she looked exhausted, her eyes ringed with sleeplessness from juggling 2 part-time jobs and community college classes. She wasn't unkind, just overwhelmed. Lila waited until the customers ahead of her moved aside before she whispered, barely audible, Excuse me, do you have, maybe, an expired cake?" A couple at a nearby table exchanged looks and snickered under their breath. One man muttered something about street kids and their begging. Sarah blinked, startled. "An expired what? Sweetie, why would you want—" "It's for my birthday," Lila said quickly, as if explaining something shameful. "I don't need a whole one, just a piece, even if it's old." There was a tightness in the way she pulled her coat closer, as if bracing for humiliation, something she clearly expected. Near the back corner of the bakery, sitting with his back to the wall the way trained soldiers often do, Sergeant Mason Hale looked up. Mason was 36, a man built not for comfort, but for survival. His body carried the memory of years spent in harsh terrains, broad shoulders, square jaw, thick forearms with faint scars running like pale rivers along his tan skin. He kept his black hair short in a regulation cut, and his stubble framed a mouth usually set in a quiet, unreadable line. His gray-green eyes, sharp and alert, belonged to someone who had seen things far worse than winter storms. People often said he looked intimidating, but the truth was simpler. Mason Hale was a man who had outlived too many ghosts. At his feet lay Ranger, a 4-year-old German shepherd with striking amber-toned fur. The dog's ears were erect, his muscles tense beneath the thick coat. A retired Marine K-9, Ranger had served alongside Mason in Afghanistan. Calm around civilians, deadly when needed, the dog carried his own scars, one faint line under his right eye, another along his hind leg. Ranger tolerated strangers, trusted few, and watched everything. When Lila spoke, Ranger's head lifted slightly, ears twitching. Mason felt the shift immediately. The dog reacted to emotional distress almost as sharply as danger. Mason followed Ranger's gaze and saw her, tiny, cold, alone, asking for expired cake. Something inside him tightened painfully. For a moment, another girl's face flashed before his eyes, a child he had carried in his arms years ago, dust-covered and limp, after a raid gone wrong, a child he hadn't been able to save. Her name was Adela. Her memory still stalked Mason in his sleep. He stood before he even realized he was moving. Ranger rose with him instantly, obedient and protective. Mason approached the counter, boots thudding softly against the polished floor. His presence changed the temperature of the room. An imposing Marine in his winter field uniform, olive green jacket zipped up to the collar, digital camo pants tucked into tan high-ankle boots. The uniform didn't just speak of discipline. It carried loss, honor, and things he never talked about. He crouched slightly to meet Lila's eyes. His voice was low, steady, warm in a way that surprised even him. "Hey there," he said. "I heard what you asked. But tell me, why would a birthday girl want an expired cake?" Lila stiffened. She looked ready to bolt, like a stray animal, unsure if a hand reaching toward it meant kindness or pain. I don't have money," she whispered. "I don't have anyone to buy one." Her gaze dropped to the floor. Her voice trembled on the last word, not in self-pity, but in the quiet acceptance of a child who learned too early not to expect anything from life. Mason swallowed hard. The ache in his chest returned, deeper this time. In that moment, he didn't see just Lila. He saw every lost child he had ever tried to save. He saw every failure carved into his bones. He saw himself too. A man alone in a cabin at the edge of Silver Ridge, living with a dog and memories he hated. He straightened and turned to Sarah. "How much for the entire vanilla cake with the pink frosting?" Sarah blinked. "Sir, that one's $48. Mason took out his worn leather wallet and placed $300 bills on the counter. "I'll take it, and add some pastries, and 2 hot sandwiches." Sarah's mouth dropped open. Yes, sir, of course. Put 8 candles on it," he added. "8?" Sarah Sauce echoed. "She's turning 7. "Exactly," Mason said quietly. "1 extra for good luck." Lila's eyes widened as if she were witnessing magic. "For me?" she whispered. "For you," Mason answered. "Every kid deserves a birthday cake." She didn't know how to respond. Her small hands twisted the edge of her coat, and her whole body trembled in a way that had nothing to do with the cold. "Are you hungry?" Mason asked. She nodded because lying would have been pointless. Within minutes, Sarah handed Mason a bag of warm food and carefully boxed the cake. Mason took the box and gently placed it in Ranger's saddlebags, custom-made pouches the dog wore when working. Ranger didn't mind. He simply looked up with eyes softening at Lila, as if he already understood she was someone fragile who needed guarding. Mason extended a hand toward the door. "Come on, birthday girl. Let's get you warm and fed." Lila hesitated, fear, confusion, and hope all fighting inside her small frame. "Nobody's ever done something like this for me," she admitted. Mason's voice softened. "Well, maybe this year is different." But as they stepped outside into the falling snow, Lila clutching Ranger's fur, Ranger staying close, and Mason holding the warm bag, none of them noticed a figure sitting in a parked truck across the street, watching the trio with eyes that didn't blink. And as the truck engine rumbled quietly to life, its headlights remained off. It began to follow them. The danger had already noticed her. Lila Carter just didn't know it yet, neither did Sergeant Mason Hale. Snow deepened over the quiet roads of Silver Ridge as night crept in without mercy. Mason Hale walked with a steady, disciplined stride, holding a bag of warm food in one hand while the boxed birthday cake rested securely in Ranger's saddlebags. Beside him, tiny Lila Carter tried to match his pace, though her steps were timid and hesitant, as if she feared the world might punish her for walking beside someone who seemed carved out of strength and certainty. Ranger stayed glued to her side, the large, amber-furred German shepherd lowering his pace to match the girl's smaller stride. Every few steps he glanced up at her, checking, assessing, protecting, behavior ingrained through years of combat training. Mason didn't miss any of those glances. Ranger rarely showed such instant attachment. The dog treated most strangers with watchful neutrality, tolerating them only because his Marine partner commanded it, but with Lila, Ranger behaved as if she had always been part of their unit. That alone unsettled Mason more than he expected. They walked past shuttered shops, dim streetlights, and snow-covered cars until the lights of Frosted Pines Bakery were long behind them. Mason finally cleared his throat and asked gently, "Lila, tell me where your home is so I can get you settled." The girl looked down, biting her lip. She hesitated, not out of rebellion, but out of fear of telling the truth. After another block, Mason realized she wasn't guiding him anywhere. "Lila," he said, quieter now. "Where are we going?" She stopped walking. Ranger stopped too, tail still, ears rising to their alert angle. Lila pointed with a shaking hand toward a narrow alley beside an old brick church. The structure, once grand with stained glass windows and tall steeples, now looked abandoned, paint peeling, roof sagging under snow, doorboards cracked. Behind it was a small parking lot filled with rusted vehicles and snowdrifts. "That's where I stay," Lila whispered. Mason stared at her, then at the dark alley, then back again. "You live there?" She nodded. She walked ahead, stepping through snow until she reached a cluster of empty milk crates and cardboard boxes stacked against a dumpster. Ranger sniffed the area, his body lowering, tail flicking in agitation. Mason crouched and lifted a damp cardboard flap to reveal a small space insulated with thin blankets, old newspapers, and a stuffed toy missing one eye. The space was child-sized, miserably so. Mason exhaled slowly, but the breath trembled with restrained anger not at her, but at the world that had failed her so thoroughly. "How long have you been sleeping here?" he asked. Lila shrugged as if days and nights blurred together. "A while, a few weeks, I think. It's not too bad when the box stays dry." He closed his eyes briefly. His pulse thudded painfully. He sat beside her gently. "Lila, where are your parents?" She stayed quiet, then tugged on a boyan, loose thread on her coat. "My mom died. A car hit her 2 years ago. People said it was an accident." Mason's chest tightened. She continued, voice tiny. "They put me in a home with other kids, but a man came, and he tried to take me without papers. He said it was special placement." She frowned, as if repeating something she did not fully understand. "I didn't like him. He scared me. So I ran away." Mason opened his eyes sharply. "A man? Do you remember what he looked like?" She hesitated, then nodded. He had dark hair, a big cut on his chin, eyes like— she searched for the word. "Like he never smiled. Ever." A slice of cold went through Mason, not from the winter air, but from recognition. Ethan Crow. A trafficker, one of the worst Mason had ever encountered during joint task operations near the Mexico border. A man who survived too many raids, unpredictable, ruthless, and obsessed with exploiting undocumented or unprotected children. Mason had captured him after a firefight that left Ranger injured and 2 Marines dead. Crow had sworn revenge as he was dragged away. Mason thought prison walls would be the end of that threat, until now. His jaw hardened, the muscle working sharply under his stubble. "Lila," he said carefully, "the man who tried to take you, he didn't tell you his name, did he?" She shook her head. "No, but he said I was perfect. I didn't want to be perfect." She hugged herself as if trying to disappear. Ranger pressed against her leg, sensing her distress. She lowered a hand and gently stroked his fur. "Ranger doesn't think I'm perfect. He thinks I'm safe." Mason swallowed hard. The ache in his chest deepened. He made a decision. "You're not staying here another night." She blinked up at him. "Where will I go?" "With me," he said. "At least for now. You'll be warm, fed, safe, and Ranger will be with you." Ranger gave a soft grunt of approval, nudging her hand. Lila glanced between the two of them, uncertain but hopeful. "Are you sure?" "Positive," Mason said quietly. "Let's go." They walked under falling snow toward the outskirts of Silver Ridge, where pine forests thickened and the town gave way to long stretches of quiet road. Eventually, the silhouette of a rustic cabin appeared. Wooden beams, stone chimney, soft orange light glowing through frosted windows. Mason's cabin. A place he had chosen precisely because it was isolated enough to quiet memories, yet close enough to town to respond to emergencies. Living alone with Ranger had become his routine. Quiet, predictable, empty. Inside, warmth greeted them instantly. The cabin smelled of pine, old books, and the faint lingering scent of gun oil from Mason's meticulous cleaning habits. Ranger shook off snow at the door, then trotted ahead to inspect the rooms in his usual perimeter check. Lila stood awkwardly near the entry, staring at the cozy interior with awe she tried to hide. "Sit," Mason said gently, pointing to the couch near the fireplace. She obeyed, perching on the edge like she expected someone to scold her for touching the furniture. Mason heated soup, prepared sandwiches, and brought the birthday cake to the table. Lila ate slowly at first, then faster when she realized no one was going to take food from her. Mason watched silently, trying not to betray how much it hurt him to see a child eat like she had spent years starving. After dinner, he showed her the bathroom and gave her a set of warm clothes that once belonged to his late niece, kept in storage for sentimental reasons he never talked about. When she emerged, hair damp and clean, wearing a soft sweater and leggings far too big for her, but warm nonetheless, she looked less like a lost child and more like a little girl again. Ranger followed her constantly, acting like a guardian spirit with fur. Mason made up the extra bedroom with fresh blankets. "This room is yours tonight," he said. "You can sleep here as long as you need." Lila touched the bed cautiously, as if afraid it might vanish. "I've never slept in a real bed," she whispered. The words stabbed at Mason's heart. "Well," he said softly, "you do now." She climbed in, curling beneath the blankets. Ranger circled once and lay down outside her door, head resting on his paws, eyes half open but alert. Mason had seen Ranger sleep lightly during missions, especially when guarding vulnerable people. Tonight, Ranger behaved exactly the same. Mason stood in the hallway for a long moment, watching the dog and the closed bedroom door. His thoughts churned, memories of the trafficker, the raid, the threats Crow whispered through broken teeth. His instincts screamed danger, a tightening in his gut honed by years of combat experience. Something wasn't right. Crow never gave up easily, and if he had tried to take Lila once, he would try again. The question wasn't if, it was when. Mason locked the doors, checked the windows, and quietly loaded a handgun he prayed he wouldn't need. As he turned off the last light, Ranger lifted his head, ears twitching at some distant sound outside. Mason paused, listening. Snow fell silently against the roof. But beneath it, something shifted. A branch. A footstep. Maybe imagination. Maybe not. Mason whispered, "Stay alert, Ranger." Outside the cabin, beyond the tree line, a pair of headlights briefly flickered, then vanished. The night was no longer peaceful. Something had found them, and it was watching. Wind clawed at the cabin walls as night thickened, turning the forest beyond into a dark, restless sea of shadows. Inside, the soft glow of a single lamp lit the wooden kitchen where Mason Hale stood preparing a simple meal, soup simmering on the stove, toasted bread warming in the oven. The familiarity of the motions steadied him, helped quiet the unease gnawing at his chest, but it never disappeared entirely. Not with a child sleeping in the next room, not with the memory of Ethan Crow now awakened in his mind. Ranger lay close to the kitchen doorway, his amber coat rippling slightly each time he breathed. He had been calm for most of the evening, ears relaxed, eyes half-lidded as if allowing himself a moment of peace. But as Mason set the spoon down, Ranger's head snapped up, his ears pricked sharply upward, body stiffening, weight shifting to his forepaws. A low growl began deep in his chest. Not a warning, not confusion, recognition. Mason froze. "Ranger?" he whispered. The dog growled again, so low the air itself seemed to vibrate. Mason's instincts flared. He reached for his jacket, then his handgun holstered on the counter. Ranger moved first, padding toward the back window, every muscle tight. Mason followed closely, careful not to make noise. Fresh footprints sliced through the snow behind the cabin, long strides, deep impressions, pointing straight toward the back door. And stabbed into the wooden frame was a small folded note held in place with a knife, a military-grade combat knife. Mason pulled the note free. His hands remained steady, but inside him something dark and cold opened up. The message was scrawled in jagged handwriting he recognized instantly. "The child won't slip away this time. You owe me a life. E.C. Ethan Crow. Alive, here." And close enough to touch the cabin door. Mason's heart thudded, but his mind sharpened. Ranger growled louder, hackles rising like bristling flame. "Easy, boy. Mason murmured, though his own voice was far from calm. He pulled his phone from his pocket and opened the encrypted messaging app used only for emergencies. He typed a quick code red alert to the only person he trusted in this part of Colorado. Corporal Lucas Bryant. Lucas was 38, slightly older than Mason by 2 years, a man of medium height and muscular build with short brown hair graying at the temples. His angular face carried faint smile lines and heavier frown lines, the combination of fatherhood and years spent in military police work. Lucas had a crooked nose from a bar fight in his 20s, a scar under his right eyebrow from a riot response gone wrong, and a reputation in Silver Ridge for being the sheriff who didn't flinch, not from gunfire, nor from grief. Seconds later, Lucas replied, "Ethan was sighted in Pine County 2 hours ago. He's armed, not alone. 2 men with him. I'm 10 minutes out. Don't engage unless necessary." Mason cursed under his breath. Ranger's growl turned into a low bark, sharp and urgent. "He's close," Mason muttered. He moved quickly through the cabin, turning off lights, double-locking windows, pulling Lila's bedroom door open just enough to check on her. She slept curled tightly under the blankets, Ranger's old stuffed training toy beside her. Her breathing was soft, unaware, pure. Mason closed the door. They needed to leave. Now. He gathered supplies, a go bag, first aid kit, ammunition, bottled water. The cabin was too exposed, too isolated. If Ethan Crow was here already, this place would become a cage. But before he could reach the front door, Ranger barked, loud, sharp, explosive. Someone was behind the cabin. Mason's blood ran cold. He dropped to one knee beside the living room window, pulling the curtain back a hair. A silhouette moved between the trees. A man built tall and lean, wearing a dark jacket, boots crunching quietly through the snow. Another figure followed behind him. 2 men, exactly as Lucas warned. Ranger's growl deepened as he pressed against Mason's leg. "Back," Mason whispered. He reached for the old hunting rifle mounted above the fireplace, a Winchester .308 with a walnut stock, belonging once to Mason's father. The weapon wasn't military issue, but still deadly and precise. Mason checked the chamber, loaded. He killed the remaining lights, leaving the cabin in deep shadow. Footsteps circled toward the rear door. Ranger stood ready, body angled between the sound and Lila's room. Mason's breathing slowed. His mind slipped into combat mode, the calm, cold precision of a Marine who had survived far worse than midnight intruders. But this wasn't a desert raid or a foreign battlefield. This was his home, and a child was under his protection. A soft tapping came from the back door. Tap, tap, tap. No one in their right mind would knock at this hour in a blizzard. This was psychological warfare. Ethan Crow enjoyed that sort of thing. A voice followed, muffled but too familiar. "Sergeant Hale?" it crooned, low and taunting. "You keeping something from me?" Mason stiffened. Ranger's lip curled. It wasn't Ethan. The tone was different. This must be one of his men. Tap, tap. "Open up, Marine. We just want to talk." Mason raised the rifle and aimed at the back entrance. He stepped silently, positioning himself behind the heavy kitchen counter. Ranger moved to his left, perfectly aligned. Mason glanced down at him. Ranger's amber eyes reflected the faint light like molten gold. This was the same look Ranger wore during raids, focused, calculating, ready. Inside Lila's room, something shifted. A soft whimper. She was waking. The back doorknob shook violently. "Last chance, Hale." Mason's voice was low steel. "Ranger, protect." The dog launched to Lila's door, standing guard like a living barricade. The moment the back door's lock snapped, Mason fired. The shot thundered through the cabin. A man shouted, another cursed, footsteps scrambled. Then, a different sound. Snow crunching, movement circling toward the kitchen window. Mason's mind raced. "They're trying to flank." He ducked to the living room, crouched behind the sofa, and peered through the side window. A second man approached with a crowbar, face obscured by a hood. Even from a distance, Mason could make out the build, shorter, stockier than the first man, with broad shoulders and clumsy footwork. Not professionals, hired muscle. But Ethan Crow wasn't among them. He wasn't stupid enough to come first. "Damn it," Mason muttered. "He's testing defenses." The second intruder raised the crowbar to smash the glass. A sudden blinding beam shot across the snow. A vehicle. Headlights, tires skidded on ice. A siren whooped once, sharp, intense, familiar. Lucas Bryant's patrol truck slid into view. Lucas jumped out. Even in the dim light, Mason could see him clearly. Broad frame wrapped in a sheriff's winter jacket, badge glinting beneath the hood, gloved hands gripping a shotgun. His face, rugged and unshaven tonight, was locked in a grim scowl. "Sheriff's Department!" Lucas roared. "Drop the weapon!" The intruder panicked, running into the woods. Lucas chased him a few steps before stopping. He knew better than to follow into darkness alone. The second man fled behind the cabin, disappearing into the forest's black jaws. Lucas hurried to the porch, shouting, "Mason, you okay?" Mason opened the door. Ranger stayed stationed outside Lila's room, still guarding. "We're alive," Mason said. "But this was just the opening act," Lucas cursed. "Crow's close, too close." Mason nodded grimly. "He wants Lila." Lucas looked toward the forest, jaw tight. "Then we move her. Tonight. You can't stay here." Mason's eyes cut toward Lila's shut door. "She's sleeping. Scared enough already." The sheriff wiped snow from his brow. "Then wake her gently, because Crow's not done." Mason stepped inside, hand on the doorknob, heart tightening. He knew Lucas was right, but he also knew something else. If Crow had sent 2 men without showing his face, it meant Ethan Crow wasn't just close, he was watching. Snow hammered the cabin roof like 1,000 frantic fists as midnight swallowed the forest whole. The moment Lucas Bryant's warning left his lips, Mason Hale's combat instincts surged awake in full force. In his years as a Marine, Mason had operated in blackout raids, ambush valleys, mud-soaked trenches, and desert strongholds where seconds meant the difference between life and death. That instinct, honed in battlefields that still haunted him, rose now like a tide of steel. He moved quickly but silently, flicking off the remaining lights one by one until darkness coated the cabin's interior. Only the faint orange glow from the dying fireplace embers remained. Ranger immediately positioned himself near the hallway, ears stiff, amber fur bristling like a storm warning flag. Mason turned to Lucas. "Get back to your truck. Call for backup. Don't wait for me. We don't have time." Lucas frowned deeply, his breath fogging in the cold air. "You need support. I'm not leaving you alone." "You won't make it in time if you stay," Mason replied. His tone held no anger, only the unshakable certainty of someone who had learned to calculate threat and survival with mathematical precision. "He's coming now, Lucas." Lucas gritted his teeth. His brown eyes, sharp with concern, flicked toward Lila's bedroom. The sheriff wasn't afraid of death. He had faced men with knives, guns, and drunken fury in alleyways for years, but the presence of a child changed everything. He nodded reluctantly. "Back up in 15, maybe less." "Go," Mason said. Lucas slipped back into the storm. As soon as the sheriff's truck disappeared down the icy road, Mason locked the front door, secured the deadbolt, and dragged a heavy oak dresser across the entrance. He moved furniture with low, precise grunts, adrenaline sharpening his senses. Ranger mirrored every step, staying inches from him. Lila still slept, oblivious to the nightmare approaching. Mason cracked open her bedroom door. She was curled up beneath blankets, clutching the stuffed toy Ranger had given her. Her face, soft and peaceful, made something ache sharply inside him. Not again, he thought. Not another child. He crouched beside her and gently touched her shoulder. "Lila," he whispered. Her eyes fluttered open. Confusion replaced sleepiness. "Mason, what's happening?" "You need to hide," he said softly but firmly. "Right now." Fear spread across her small face like ripples through water. "Is it the bad man?" "Yes," Mason answered honestly. Lying to her would be cruel. "But Ranger and I are here. We won't let him hurt you. I need you to trust me, completely." She swallowed hard, nodded. "I trust you." He lifted the edge of the bed. "Under here. Stay quiet. Do not come out until I tell you, no matter what you hear." She crawled underneath, clinging to her toy. Mason lowered the blanket dust ruffle so she was hidden from view. Ranger nudged his nose against the bed frame, as if promising he would guard her. A loud, metallic click echoed from outside, faint but unmistakable. A key sliding into a lock. "Damn it," Mason breathed. "He stole a spare." Footsteps crunched through snow. 2 sets. No, 3. Mason gestured to Ranger, and the dog assumed position by the back hall, body low, ready. The rear doorknob rattled. 3 seconds of silence. Then the lock gave way. The back door swung open just an inch, just enough for cold air to spill inside. Ethan Crow entered first. Even in the low firelight, his presence filled the room like poison. Ethan was around 40, tall and wiry, with sunken cheeks and a jagged scar slicing down the left side of his chin, exactly as Lila had described. His dark hair was cropped unevenly, as if cut with a dull knife. His pale blue eyes were sharp, lifeless, and hungry, like a wolf that had forgotten how to be human. He moved with a predatory stillness that came from years of stalking human prey. Behind him came 2 men, broad-shouldered brutes with cheap black coats, ski masks, and visible tattoos crawling from their collars. One had a crooked nose and heavy brows. The other had pockmarked skin and a shaved head. They were not professionals. They were thugs, opportunists, but armed opportunists. Ethan whispered, 17 minutes, boys. That's all we need. Hale's alone. Quick in, quick out. He didn't know Lucas had been there moments earlier. Perfect. Mason aimed from the shadows and shouted, "Get out of my house!" The thugs spun toward the sound. Ranger attacked first. With a growling snarl that ripped through the room, the German shepherd launched forward, barreling into the man with the shaved head. Ranger hit him with the weight of a small missile, jaws clamping onto the man's arm. The thug screamed as Ranger dragged him to the floor, teeth sinking deeper. The second man swung a crowbar toward the dog. Mason fired, one controlled shot. The crowbar man collapsed, weapon clattering uselessly beside him. Ethan Crow ducked behind a support beam, drawing a handgun from his jacket. "Still shooting straight, Hale? I was hoping prison would have softened you." Mason's voice remained calm. "You're not taking her." "Oh, but I am," Ethan hissed. "You owe me blood for what happened at the border." Mason shifted positions behind a thick wooden beam, hearing Ranger's growls and the thug's pained gasps. He couldn't risk another shot yet, not with Lila in the cabin. Ethan fired twice blindly. Bullets tore through the drywall, splintering wood. Mason moved quickly, sweeping low across the hall, staying in darkness. Ethan sprinted toward the stairs. He's going for Lila. Mason's heart surged. "Ranger, guard!" The dog released his attacker and sprinted toward the staircase. The injured thug writhed on the floor, clutching his torn arm. He wasn't a bisexual threat anymore. Ethan reached the top of the stairs and kicked Lila's door open, but Ranger was faster. The dog lunged, slamming into Ethan's side and knocking him into the wall. Ethan roared as Ranger snapped at his wrist, jaws clamping. The gun clattered down the hallway. "Get away from me, mutt," Ethan snarled. He managed to strike Ranger across the face with a heavy flashlight he must have pulled from his pocket. Ranger yelped but didn't retreat. Mason bounded up the stairs, muscles coiled with fury. He tackled Ethan, the impact shaking the narrow hallway. They crashed against the wooden floor, grappling violently. Ethan clawed at Mason's eyes, punched toward his ribs, nearly grabbing the fallen gun. No. Mason's hand closed around Ethan's wrist. He twisted, hard, bones cracked. Ethan howled. The fight turned into a brutal struggle, elbows, fists, and snarls. Mason's strength came not just from training but from something deeper, the need to protect a child who had already endured too much. "Why do you care so much?" Ethan spat through clenched teeth. "She's no one." "She's a child," Mason growled, "and I won't lose another." Rage surged through him, giving him the force he needed. Mason flipped Ethan onto his stomach and pinned him, knee pressing between the man's shoulder blades. Ethan thrashed wildly but was overpowered. Suddenly, crash! The front door burst open. "Sheriff's Department, hands where I can see them!" Lucas Bryant stormed inside with 2 deputies at his flank. One deputy was Karen Rios, a short, sturdy Latina woman in her early 30s with dark curly hair pulled into a bun. Her expression was sharp and controlled, her movements quick. The other was Tom Wheeler, a lanky, mustached officer in his 40s with a calm demeanor but steely eyes. They raced up the stairs. Mason lifted his hand slightly to show he wasn't the threat. "Second floor, suspect subdued." Karen cuffed Ethan with swift precision. Tom checked the unconscious thug downstairs, calling in EMTs when he confirmed breathing. Lucas knelt beside Mason. "You good?" Mason wiped blood from his brow. "I will be." He turned toward Lila's room just as the little girl crawled out from under the bed, trembling but unharmed. Ranger, despite his bruised muzzle and bleeding scratch, pressed gently against her. Mason, she whispered. He gathered her into his arms. She clung to him, sobbing into his shoulder. It's over, he said softly, though he wasn't sure if it truly was. For now, Ethan was caught. His men were down. But darkness didn't give up easily, and Mason knew this wasn't the end, only the end of the longest 17 minutes of his life. Morning sunlight slipped gently through the thinning winter clouds, warming the frost-kissed pines around the cabin. The storm had finally lifted. The chaos of the night, shouts, gunshots, splintered wood, blood on the floorboards, felt both distant and painfully close, like a bad dream that stubbornly lingered even after waking. Inside the cabin, silence hung thick but tender, broken only by the soft crackle of the fireplace. Lila Carter clung to Ranger's thick amber fur, her small body trembling with leftover fear she hadn't yet learned how to name. Tears streamed down her cheeks, streaking lines through the dust on her face. Ranger, though injured, lowered himself carefully so she could bury her face into his neck. He didn't whine or shift in discomfort. He simply stayed, breathing steady, warm, immovable, a living shield. Mason knelt beside them, exhaustion etched deep into the lines of his face. Hours of adrenaline had drained from him, leaving behind raw emotion he rarely allowed himself to feel. His hands, still scraped from the struggle, hovered uncertainly before he finally pulled both Lila and Ranger into a tight embrace. The three of them formed a knot of human and canine and grief, bound together not by blood but by survival. Deputies Karen Rios and Tom Wheeler stood nearby, quietly giving the moment the space it deserved. Even Karen, normally sharp-tongued, always composed, looked away, her eyes softening. Tom, with his salt-and-pepper mustache and gentle presence, lowered his head respectfully. Sheriff Lucas Bryant stood closest. Snow still clung to his jacket, melting onto the wooden floor. He watched the Marine kneeling on the cabin floor, arms wrapped protectively around a shaking little girl and a wounded dog, and something in his chest tightened. Mason Hale wasn't a man given to displays of emotion. Lucas had known him for years, had seen him stoic under fire, unflinching in war, silent at funerals. But this was different. Lucas stepped forward and spoke softly. If you want to adopt her, Mason, you have more right than anyone I've ever met. Mason lifted his gaze. His usually steady gray-green eyes wavered, emotions swirling behind them like storm clouds unsettled. Images from years past flickered. Adila, the small Afghan girl he had failed to save, her dusty fingers slipping from his grasp, her broken voice, the promise he whispered at her burial. I won't fail again, not the next one, not ever. He looked at Lila. Little, trembling, brave Lila. He touched her shoulder gently. I promise you something, he whispered to her. This time, I won't fail. Her eyes widened. She didn't fully understand the weight behind his voice, but she felt something change, like someone had placed a protective roof over her life for the first time. Lucas placed a steady hand on Mason's back. I'll handle the paperwork. You saved her life. You protected her when nobody else would. Silver Ridge doesn't take that lightly. Mason nodded, emotion choking his voice. Ranger nudged Lila's arm, his tail thumping weakly. Even injured, he was trying to comfort her. The following days were a slow process of rebuilding. Men from the sheriff's department helped repair the cabin, patching bullet holes, replacing shattered windows, fixing splintered door frames. Tom Wheeler showed surprising skill with tools, humming an old country tune while he worked. Karen brought groceries, leaving bags of bread and soup on the counter with a shy smile before hurrying out again. Lucas checked in daily, both as a sheriff and as a friend. Meanwhile, Mason tried to steady the rhythm of the cabin again. The violence of that night had carved deeper wounds in Lila's heart than anyone realized, but she handled it with the quiet resilience of a child who had survived too much already. She flinched at loud noises, clutched Ranger constantly, and had nightmares for the first week, waking up crying about shadows behind doors. Mason stayed beside her each time, talking gently until she fell asleep again. Ranger recovered quickly despite a bruised muzzle and stitches along his flank. The vet, Dr. Ellie Porter, a petite woman in her 50s with sharp gray eyes and a motherly voice, declared him a warrior with fur and praised his loyalty. Ranger tolerated her examination, though he only relaxed once Lila placed both hands on his snout and whispered, "You're still the bravest dog ever." From then on, Ranger followed Lila even more closely, as if his bond with her had been forged in the fire of danger. Weeks rolled into months. Snow melted into spring rain, and Silver Ridge warmed into a small-town bustle. Children ran through the park again. The grocery store owners waved to Lila whenever Mason brought her into town. The library staff saved picture books for her. And every officer who had been at the cabin that night treated her like someone special, someone worth protecting. The cabin changed too. A second bed was added to Lila's room. Ranger's corner became a cozy nest of blankets and newly purchased toys. Mason hung photos on the walls, landscapes from his deployments, a framed Marine Corps flag, and eventually a picture of the three of them at the park, Ranger sitting proudly as Lila tugged at his ear and giggled. Slowly, Mason's nightmares faded, not entirely, but enough that he could breathe again without drowning in memory. The biggest change of all came 3 months after the attack. It was Lila's birthday. Her real birthday this time, celebrated not in a cardboard box or with whispered wishes in the cold, but in a warm cabin lit by strings of fairy lights. Mason clumsily hung himself. Ranger wore a little blue bandana Lila tied around his neck. A vanilla cake sat on the table, this one fresh, beautifully frosted, and decorated with pink roses. 8 candles flickered gently, 7 for her age, 1 for good luck. Lila stared at the cake with tears shimmering in her eyes. Mason placed a hand on her shoulder. "Go on," he said softly. "Make a wish." She closed her eyes tightly. When she opened them again, she didn't blow the candles immediately. Instead, she looked up at Mason, really looked, at his strong shoulders, his tired eyes, the faint scars running across his hands, at Ranger leaning against Mason's leg. Her voice trembled. "Dad, Dad, Mason, my wish came true already." Mason froze. He had been called many things in his life: soldier, Marine, sergeant, hero, ghost, shadow, but nothing had ever hit him the way that single word did. Dad. He swallowed hard, vision blurring. Lila smiled, small and pure, and blew out the candles. Ranger barked once, as if celebrating. And just like that, 3 lost souls, 1 Marine, 1 little girl, 1 loyal dog, became a family. In the quiet corners of life, miracles often arrive disguised as ordinary moments. A warm meal, a safe embrace, a stranger choosing kindness over fear. And sometimes, God sends his angels not with wings, but in the form of a weary Marine, a brave little girl, or a loyal dog who refuses to leave our side. May this story remind you that even in the darkest nights, God is still working, still watching, still guiding broken hearts toward each other. Every act of compassion becomes a thread he uses to weave redemption. Every small kindness becomes a doorway for grace, and every life, no matter how wounded, can be touched, healed, and sewn back together by his mercy. As you go through your own days, may you look for the quiet miracles hiding in plain sight, and may you become one for someone who needs it. If this story moved you, please share it, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel so these messages can reach more hearts. May God bless you, protect you, and surround your home with peace and light.